All
Okay.
set, Walter.
All right, we're ready to go. Okay, members of the subcommittee are hereby advised of their duty under the State Ethics and Government Act to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflict, and are instructed to refrain from participating in any matter coming before this subcommittee with respect to which there is a conflict of interest or an appearance of conflict. Anyone know of a conflict or appearance? Please indicate. So, seeing none, we'll move forward with our agenda. I hope you folks have had a chance to read through Alice's excellent summary of our last meeting. I appreciate you doing this, Alice. I know that takes a while to do that, but it's very helpful to me to remember. But does anybody have any revisions or corrections they'd like to suggest on her summary of our last meeting? And if not, we'll just deem it accepted. I don't think we need a formal motion on that. Alice, and thank you for keeping those minutes or notes of our meeting. Let's move right into the reports. As part of our commitment as a subcommittee, we're to review the existing diversion programs, look at those, consider how they might best be optimized. So in honor of that commitment, we're going to today spend some time on the trust account compliance program. And Leonore has prepared a report for us. And Leonore, are you ready to roll with your report?
I sure am.
You got some charts and everything?
I do have charts. I hope that you all have had an opportunity to look over them. And I'm gonna take us through what happened in transition, because the trust account compliance program transitioned to me in October 2018. And so that's why your stats begin in that process. And as timing and coincidence, or maybe divine intervention would have it, we're at October 2023. So we round out with a nice picture of what we have. So I'm just gonna go through what has been done. So when let's see, it's not doing anything. Let me get there we go. When I assumed the role of Trust Account Compliance Counsel in the fall of 2018, the first thing that I did was to perform an initial assessment, because obviously anytime you're going to transition into something new, that's what you need to do. And that's, I understand, where the committee is now. And in reviewing it in 2018, the program was primarily a compliance program. It had a good list of requirements for what lawyers needed to provide. It had good basic structure for intervals for providing it. And it was adept at monitoring lawyers and just making sure that they were sending the records that they needed to send. In performing the initial assessment, I also was looking for things that could be done differently. And I had three basic things that I found at the initial assessment surrounding that. The first was, as a former deputy counsel, I knew I wanted to have more information about what was happening with the lawyers in the program. So I made it one of my goals to provide more information to deputy counsel. The other was I wanted more standardization around TAC program terms and timelines for return of the participants' files to the grievance committee. The third recommendation, basically to myself in moving forward with the program, was to make it more educational. And I didn't just pull that out of the air. At the time that this was transitioning to me, the council was also undertaking consideration of proactive management-based regulation, or PMBR, everybody's least favorite topic to consider because it's sort of broad and nebulous. And as that committee found out, the State Bar was already doing a lot of the things that might fit under that category. One of the items considered in PMBR was Trust Account Compliance Program, and it became clear from the work of that committee that the council at least envisioned that there was an education component going on with the Trust Account Compliance Program. So then the next step in the process was to set goals. And the goals were set based on what I found during the initial assessment. And so my first goal was to add an education component, also standardization, and then to provide more information for deputy counsel. The fourth goal was optimization, because I knew I needed to figure out a way to get this done efficiently so that I could continue to contribute in the other functions that I had in the Office of Counsel. So the next step was to reimagine the process. As I said at the outset, the compliance program that existed, it was a good one, it was functioning well. But if it was going to do some things differently than the predecessor, I'd have to reimagine what this looked like and do some restructuring. The first piece that I knew I needed was a dedicated person to perform the in-depth reviews of submissions and to serve as a primary contact for participants. Originally, and all of this happened in process between really beginning January 2019 to where we are now, the thought process was that I would have a dedicated paralegal who would work with me on the program. And so we kissed a few frogs in that process. But in 2022, we got my current paralegal, Elizabeth Myers. But in that process, we realized that paralegal probably wasn't the right person. I'm so grateful to Alice and Catherine, because as this program grew, and you can see that in the stats that I shared previously, they asked if there were additional resources that I needed, and whether or not an additional paralegal would be a good idea. And when I asked them to have an investigator instead, they granted that request. And it really has been the addition of a trust account compliance investigator in April of 2021 that has made all of the difference in really being able to make meaningful progress toward the goals that I just described. And so with the addition of the trust account compliance investigator in April of 2021, we now had on the TAC program team a non-lawyer staff person who possessed the skills to do two of the things under the goals. One, she could perform a meaningful in-depth review, and she also had some ability to educate. And she was also very helpful in working with me to standardize the process, and to create a meaningful tracking process. So after I trained the investigator, she was able to perform the close look reviews, and she prepares review reports of her summary, which I review. And then I also try to review at least 3 to 4 of the usual 8 submissions of each participant. What's great about that is that it frees me up to do some other things. And it also allows the participants to have more touches and communications than they ever could without the investigator. She has phone call follow-ups with these folks. She emails with them. She helps them find the right forms in order to provide the reports that are required. And her review reports meet that goal that I had of providing more information to the deputy counsel about what's happening with a program participant without requiring very much more on my part to give that information. So at the time that I assumed the role of Trust Account Compliance Counsel, at the end of TAC program participation, there was always a report from Trust Account Compliance Counsel. And that is an aspect of the program that I've kept. However, now in addition to that really short summary report from me, Deputy Counsel now get intermittent quarterly reports of the results of what the trust account compliance investigator found during her reviews. The other thing that can be nice about the process that we have in place now is we can see the progression of the lawyer. And I think that leaves the deputy counsel better able to answer questions for the grievance committee if they have them, if they're on the fence about how to treat a participant who has completed the program. We also created a structured offer and acceptance process. So now, because we have my great paralegal, Elizabeth Myers, that process is almost entirely handled by her. I've empowered her to know immediately after the grievance committee meeting without any direction from me. Her workflow indicates that she's to go through the list of all TAC referrals to prepare the offer letters for those folks. That's a standard letter that we've created. Kevin is familiar with that letter. And then I just review it to make sure it's fine. That doesn't take long. She handles getting it sent out. She handles tracking the acceptances. She handles drafting, sending the standardized letters after an acceptance comes in. All of these things now run pretty much without very little input from me, but just according to workflows that were created during the reimagination and restructuring process. As we continue in the implementation process of making all of these things happen. So we built the TAC team, and we've got a great TAC program team. We've got the investigator, we've got my paralegal, we've got workflows for the team members. The great thing about a workflow is that the person who's got to follow the task gets to see where everybody fits in the task, and we all see how we work together on the program. Both Elizabeth and our current investigator, Lori, I have trained them. They do a lot, and they do a lot to help lawyers learn more about the trust account compliance process. And over time, what has happened is, originally, a lot of the questions that would come to me, I've now answered. And so our investigator has developed a catalog of responses to certain types of issues. And so I see every response that she sends to anybody because I'm copied on all communications. So there's always the opportunity in that feedback loop for me to come back and make an adjustment either with the investigator or the lawyer if something is not communicated correctly. But for the most part, with this catalog that we've developed, that process runs fairly seamlessly as well. And so my role with regard to communication with the participants is increasingly becoming dedicated toward those difficult lawyers who are either difficult because they've just got a roadblock in their understanding of the process, or they're difficult because they're just uncooperative. And then my letters usually relate primarily to explaining how the rules relate to the tasks that the lawyers have to complete. We also now have a trust account management self-assessment that we send to lawyers. I feel like that's an area of opportunity. We don't have very much bandwidth in our current team to do very much with lawyers and that self-assessment. Our trust account compliance investigator is I would say she's sort of a 3/4 dedicated resource to trust account compliance. She still does do some general investigation work. And so that does limit how much we can grow with her, even though she's a very capable human resource, and I'm super grateful to have her. So when we're asking the question of where are we now, well, we're in the execute, reassess, and modify phase is where I would say we are. At this point, um, we have some good processes in place. We have a good team in place. We have good templates in place, and we have a good structure in place. We meet maybe once every month to every 2 months, we meet as a team. And we do that so that we can continue to reassess and modify and keep improving our progress toward the goals, but also to see if we need to add additional goals or new goals to the ones that we originally set out. One of the questions that I know this subcommittee has given some thought to is, what is the bandwidth of the program? Should it be expanded, and can it be expanded? Random audit is the primary pipeline for the files that end up in the trust account compliance program. You hopefully can tell from review of the charts that I gave you about the random audit corrections process, there's a limit on the eligible files that we'll have, and that universe is defined by the number of random audits that are conducted in any given year, and then the percentage of those that result in corrections. So the maximum potential referrals from random audit would be the entire universe of those files that require corrections. The reality is, and gratefully so, most random audit corrections end up with a nice satisfied letter, go forth and continue in your trust account management. So there's a smaller subset of those files that result in grievance referrals. And then there's a subset of those grievance referral files that end up in referral to the trust account compliance program. So I know further down on the agenda is whether or not we should consider expanding it. But when we talk about the relationship between random audit and trust account compliance program, I thought here in this overview would be the right place to at least touch on that in anticipation of the discussion to come. The other interesting thing that I noted in preparing these statistics for the subcommittee centered around this idea of resource allocation and how resource intensive is the trust account compliance program. And what I have concluded based on what the charts show is really what appears to be happening is the number of state suspension files are continuing to decrease as the number of trust account compliance files increase. And what that means is it's a shifting of resources, because in order to become a state suspension file, a deputy counsel's got to file a disciplinary complaint, and in the best case scenario, get to a consent order real quickly before any answer has been filed, any discovery is had, and a trial has occurred. Some cases resolve that way. Others don't get to a state suspension until after the full complement of the trial process has occurred. So I think when it relates to the trust account compliance program and the resources that are required to run the program, I think what you really have is a reallocation of the same kinds of files that are being handled in a different way. The only addition is the positive of adding an education component that is not a part of the state suspension process. State suspension is simply you either comply with the terms of this order or you face the possibility of having your suspension activated in response to a motion to show cause. I've tried to hit it and quit it. I'm happy to take any questions or cover any areas that you thought I would and have not.
So let me start with the first question, Leonore. With the stage suspension option, does that come to you at all, or is that handled by the deputy counsel completely, who's assigned to that case?
So a stage suspension comes to me, can come to me for the compliance part of it.
Right. Okay.
So, and there are a couple of cases where the deputy counsel keeps that particular trust account management stage suspension file in his or her compliance review caseload. So I don't see all of them. I just see some of them.
So how is there a predictable way to identify those that come to you and those that stay with the deputy counsel?
We have a way of identifying it. I'll tell you, since the state suspension compliance files have been with me, for the most part, they come over. There have been a couple of folks who have not successfully completed the trust account compliance program, and those deputy counsel have kept their compliance files, which makes sense to me because we've run the gauntlet through the trust account compliance program. And as I said, the compliance piece really is, this is what you're required to give. And if you don't, we can proceed with seeking to activate your suspension.
So the allocation of resources is interesting, that your workload is picking up, but that stage suspension workload seems to be decreasing. You're saying that's seems to be a direct correlation there.
That seems to be what's happening. And so what happens is the effort that's required to get someone to a stage suspension, in the case of some of these trust account compliance files, is being avoided.
Other questions? I don't want to ask them all. I'm sure you guys got other questions. But while we're waiting for them, the investigator is not 100% dedicated to the program, if I understand you correctly. Do you have a way of sort of coming up with an estimate of how much time is dedicated to the program versus other investigation duties?
It's really hard to do. One of the great things about working in the Office of Counsel is we're a team. And so when you consider it from that perspective, having an investigator who has all of the investigative skills necessary to pitch in when needed, there have been times where she's needed to do more of that. And so it becomes really hard to put an estimate out there.
Walter, we don't have an entirely accurate way of tracking this stuff, but Leonore estimated that about 75% of the investigator's time is devoted to this work with TAC. The paralegal's time, about 12.5% of her time, and Leonore is currently devoting about 25% of her time. So just in terms of a cost analysis, the best we could do is that we took their salaries and their benefits, because, our major resource is humans. I can't tell you about the infrastructure support costs and all that stuff, but just based on those estimated times and current salaries and benefits, it's about $101,000 on an annual basis that we're spending on the TAC program. I will tell you this, that Leonore, and I don't know if you said this today, Leonore, but when she and I met last week with Kelly to talk about this, and Leonore said, we're really at a turning point for the TAC program based on the work that she's done, which she's shown you, through the process of assessing what she inherited, right to establishing goals and then implementing those goals to the present point. We're really kind of at that point where things have really been standardized. The goals are being met, and she's transferring more and more of this responsibility for the day-to-day management of the program to the investigator. And one option that I see in my role is to have a dedicated investigator for the TAC program, who is actually given a title similar to what we do now with the membership program and with the CLE program and specialization program, where we call those folks managing directors of those programs. So to give the investigator a title that goes with the authority, and to shift more of that responsibility, where you would have Leonore or a qualified deputy counsel who is providing the oversight and the guidance and the, sort of the end checkoff for these people. But the vast majority of the work is done by an investigator and a paralegal. And I think we could do that, could continue to do that within that $100,000 budget that we currently are allocating to this program. So the question, I think, becomes one of, is that expense worth the outcome? That may lead to what Kelly's research had on this recidivism question. I think Leonore's point is really important. We can't really do a complete cost accounting for this, because one of the things the TAC program does is, because it diverts people respondents who would otherwise be being dealt with by individual deputy counsels and individual grievance files, it diverts them from the whole process of getting them teed up for a state suspension and then enforcing the state suspension, and moves them over to the TAC program. So you're saving time of other deputy counsel in that way. And I don't have a way to account for the financial benefit of that specifically. But also, it seems to me that one of the intangible benefits is that participants are actually being told, learn and do and get better and improve. So that, there's a direct educational component, there's oversight, and if they can't make it after TAC, then maybe it becomes a different issue. But if they get through the TAC program, they have gone a long way towards learning how to manage a trust account in the right way.
Alice, can I just clarify one point?
Sure.
It doesn't, so getting into the TAC program diverts the back half of the state's suspension process. All of these files go through the grievance process. So participation in the TAC program doesn't save a deputy counsel's time investigating the matter as a grievance. What going into the TAC program does is it can avoid the time and effort associated with pursuing the matter in a DHC context to get to a state suspension.
May I ask a question?
Gordon.
Yeah, Leonore, Kevin and the other two subcommittee for grievance chairs see these recommendations coming through. A file is opened. It's worked by deputy counsel and thoroughly worked in just about every case. And there's a recommendation, send it to TAC. Are they bringing those by you as well to get your input as to whether it should or should not be, or whether it's TAC worthy before it comes to the subcommittees?
For anyone that is like what I would consider a close call, where the deputy counsel is like, I have this concern. Do you think this would be a good fit? Yes, 100%.
Okay. All right. That's reassuring. Another question, unfair question. has there ever been a mistake? Have you ever gotten one referred and shouldn't have been?
I will say this. I don't think there's ever been a mistaken referral. I will say there have been folks who've shown themselves uncooperative after accepting the grievance committee's offer to participate.
Yeah.
I don't dig deep enough into the investigation to know whether there were signs of that before or not.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah. Well, I see them, and so do the other subcommittee chairs, and Kevin, of course, sees them all. Catherine sees them all, and they appear to be extremely well done. You know, the investigator and the workups and everything. So they're compelling. And so it doesn't take much to see that should at least be tried. And as you say, there's a lot of work done on that front end that won't be saved, but it's a prediction of success on the back end that, you know, once it gets that far. So that's also to keep in mind for everybody on the subcommittee here. Okay, I'll shut up.
Other questions or comments? Leonard, remind me, what is the typical length of time somebody is in the program or they're eligible to be booted out?
So for now, we'd had everybody on a 2-year program, the full term. We feel like we're at a point at which we can begin to grant people early dismissal, as it were. I think my thoughts are right now to just keep everybody set on a 2-year term. When I assumed the role, some people had 1-year contracts, some people had 2-year contracts, and some of the people who had 1-year terms when I started still weren't fixed after 1 year. So that meant they had to be extended. And when I thought about how we're using our time and resources, it's funny, my daughter said for Halloween, she has a sign on her door that says knock, psychic readings here. Now, I don't know if she can really give what's promised, but I know that I can't. And so I found it difficult to try to decide at the beginning how well somebody's likely to perform during. So the way we plan to approach shorter terms is to set everybody for a 2-year initial term. And if we find that someone is quickly and continually demonstrating their ability to comply, to return them back early to the grievance committee with a recommendation that they be satisfied in terms of their commitment to the program.
Leonard, this is Fred. Remind me, when folks are participating in the TAC program, are they required to defray some of our administrative costs for the program?
Not currently, no.
Fred, we have had legislation proposing the authority to cost shift for that. It hasn't gotten very far and gotten in traction with the General Assembly, but that has been one of our goals. We do have to have our fees approved by the General Assembly. So we've been working on that.
So the submissions that are reviewed by the investigator, are those basically the quarterly reconciliations? Is that what that package is, or is it something different?
The first package is a little broader than that. I like to have a benchmark at the start of participation. So at the beginning, we've got to see all of the client ledgers Because the reconciliation reports, you could sort of make up any numbers and we don't have anything to cross-check against. The other thing is it also gives us a window into, are you keeping those underlying records correctly, so that we know if there's a need to intervene in that way. In their initial assessment, their initial submission, they also have to return that that trust account self-assessment. So we can at least see what you think of yourself relative to what we think of you. And then they've also got to check a couple of other major boxes in the initial submissions. And then generally speaking, it is just the quarterly reconciliations and reviews. Many of our participants are required to provide escheatment plans. And so we do work with the participants around handling their aged funds. Sometimes they have to intermittently provide proof that they are communicating with people whose funds they're holding, so that we can see that they're making progress in getting themselves ready to escheat. But generally speaking, after the initial submission, yes, it is the required quarterly reconciliation reports with supporting documentations and their quarterly reviews. And embedded in that is included the monthly reviews and the monthly reconciliations provided to us on a quarterly basis.
All right. Thanks so much, Leonora. If there are not any more questions, let's move on to our next topic. And Kelly, you're on board.
Hi, everyone. So I pulled some data about what happens with the respondents that Leonora has dealt with over the years since she's restructured the program, and those that have entered the program since 2018 and also have left the program since 2018. So they've done a full round of it in one way or the other. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so y'all should have received this and hopefully had time to review it before the meeting. But generally speaking, what the numbers show is two things: is that we have a very high percentage of respondents who essentially graduate from the program and their grievance that initiated their participation in the TAC program is dismissed. So of the 48 people that have gone through the program from 2018 to present, and again, that's not including anyone who is currently enrolled, but just those who have been in it and are no longer in the program, 75% of those people, their grievance was dismissed. There were a few instances where the grievance ended in a letter of warning, admonition, and one reprimand. The admonition and reprimands are usually for there was some problem during the program, or there was something about the way the initial grievance came in that the committee saw fit to give that kind of a discipline to that respondent. But again, it's very rare, 4 and 2%. And then the remaining 4 that were referred to DHC, those were people who just decided to stop cooperating with the program altogether. And where they just were like, nope, I'm done, peace out. And so that always goes back to grievance. And then that's how we get our referral to DHC. And a lot of those end up our state suspensions. In terms of true recidivism, the second chart here shows that there is virtually no recidivism among the 48 respondents, which is really great. Only 2 of the 48 respondents received additional discipline for trust account related misconduct. No one received any additional discipline for non-trust account related misconduct. So hopefully, it's we don't have a lot of data here. We don't have a lot of years to look back on, but This is incredibly encouraging numbers, because 95%, just over 95%, have absolutely nothing once they complete that TAC program. So, and so that's kind of where we are, and that's what the numbers showed. And again, let's see, just as a note that like 2 of the dismissals were due to the death of the respondent. One was because one respondent transferred to inactive status, and another was an early dismissal because they no longer had a need for a trust account because of new employment. So, but I don't think that really impacts those numbers in any kind of significant way.
That is a remarkably low recidivism rate, but I guess we have to be realistic and appreciate that that's not a lot of data.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But it is encouraging.
It is. Okay. Questions for Kelly? Any other comments or observations about that? Thanks, Kelly. If you could take that.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that right now. There we go.
No problem.
Button was hiding on me.
Okay, so we've already touched on this a little bit, but let's go to our next bullet, and that's back to Leonore and Alice on the staffing costs. I don't know if there's anything more on the historical side of that. Alice, you've got the report that you didn't tell us in the first section about staffing and costs. Is there anything new on that?
Well, just what I told you, that the costs from the staffing perspective based on the current allocation of their time is about $101,000, and that's benefits and salaries, and not looking at other overhead costs. So, you know, I've talked with Leonore about this, and I will be candid with you that I have felt like maybe we needed to be doing something that was less intensive, that required less time from the staff. I have sort of come around to seeing this as a program that Leonore has spent a lot of time on over the last few years in order to really bring it up to the quality program that it is right now, and what it's doing. And I think that we're at a juncture where if we can shift some of that oversight responsibility away from Leonore, which would free her up to, you know, do her work as deputy counsel and handle other cases in the office of counsel, and shift some of that responsibility to the woman who's been her chief investigator, who has done a phenomenal job, is very well trained, and knows the program and has been instrumental in helping to standardize things. Really to the point of having that person be 100% dedicated to the TAC program, such that we could reduce Leonore's time to, you know, something in the neighborhood of less than 20% of her time, maybe the 12.5% that we've got the paralegal dedicated to the program. There's some tools that we need to give the whole program to make it even more effective. The trust account handbook is very old and out of date. That needs to be revised. Leonore started on that, is working closely with Lori, the investigator, to do that work. Leonore and I talked about getting videos on common problems of trust accounting, like short 15-minute kind of videos that we could provide to participants in TAC and maybe in other contexts as well. That would go a long way towards the educational component of the program. And then I would, you know, recommend that and actually the way this subcommittee, if you agree with those thoughts, if that was a recommendation from the subcommittee, that would help me in the budgeting process for 24, because then I could say, this is a recommendation on how to maximize the TAC program, which would free me up in a way to make recommendations with regard to, you know, another investigator, if that's what we need in order to make up for the time devoted by the TAC investigator to the program. That's kind of my vision of the future operational needs of the program. Leonore, what do you see? And I think we ought to ask for Catherine's input on this too.
Alice, you covered what we talked about.
So what's the vision about the revised handbook? Is that going to be more developed as an online tool
Yes.
or maybe interactive? I don't know if that makes sense, but
I don't know about interact. Well, I mean, it'll have live links to ethics opinions and the rules and all of that stuff, but don't know how interactive it would be. But it's the trustee on handbook. I think the last major edit of that was done by me, maybe 10 years or more ago. It was based on a handbook that was put together by Bruno, the infamous Bruno. And it kind of includes absolutely everything you could possibly think about a trust account. And for that reason, it's not very useful. It's just too much and too long and whatnot. That's something that we just need to find the time to do and get done. The videos, we really need to call on some people that can dedicate their time to doing this. And I don't have a staff solution for that yet, Walter. That's, have to figure out. I've got people who are really talented at making videos, and I have people who are really talented at explaining trust accounts. And so we have to marry the two in some way and then find the time for them to do that. I wouldn't recommend, hiring anybody for that exclusive purpose or adding anybody to the staff for that purpose.
I can just imagine that could be a time suck, couldn't it?
Yeah, but once it's
produce
done,
to produce a quality video. Yeah.
But once it's done, and then it eliminates Lori having to educate somebody one-on-one, because you can then say, here's a video on how you reconcile your trust account, every quarter. And then, let me know if you have questions afterwards.
Well, it certainly serves the educational function, and we all know people learn by reading and they learn by seeing and hearing, and sometimes you just need both, visual, audio, and just the reading, or all three of those to make things make sense. So sounds to me like an excellent idea. It's the implementing that's going to be the challenge, isn't it? Other thoughts?
Catherine, why don't you share your thoughts? You've been overseeing this program for a long time.
Well, I think that it's an important program because a lot of the people who are not recidivists on with our small number of examples that we have, they're not bad people. They're not trying to do the wrong thing. A lot of times it seems like to me, they really do not understand what's required of them, and they feel overwhelmed by it. And sometimes, yes, they're, closing their eyes and looking away and not devoting the time. But I don't know that it's because they just don't care about it so much as they feel overwhelmed by something they don't understand. So I think that the numbers would bear out the idea that it does help the people who participate in it a lot. The concern, of course, is, if it is a sufficient number of people to justify the cost. But I think if we, and also it's been hard for me to let Leonora, devote so much time to this, which is what exactly she's been asked to do. I mean, she's doing exactly what we've asked her to do, but she's a great trial lawyer, and we have not had her try in as many cases, and that's been a loss to the Office of Counsel. So, I'm in agreement with Alice that if we could find a way to have it more supervised but less hands-on for Leonora, I would be in favor of that. But also would like to say, I think Leonora's done a fantastic job. She's, this is exactly what we asked her to do and then some, and it's really a very high quality program that she's created, and which is one of the reasons I think it could operate without her hands on it every single day, because she has set it up for such a great success.
So I'm sure y'all have presented this, but I'm just drawing a blank on it. What's the average number of participants at any given time in the program?
So Catherine, is that right for me to speak to this?
Absolutely.
We're sort of just getting to an average. You will remember that I said the pipeline is the the primary pipeline. It can get to TAC other ways, but the primary pipeline is the random audit correction process. I was doing the same thing on the random audit correction side. And so we're just now on the random audit correction side, standard enough to have some timelines for when people have either got a fish or cut bait. The goal is generally within reason 2 to 3 opportunities to correct. If you don't correct by then you've got to get sorted out in grievance. So what I can tell you is we are decreasing. If you looked at, and let me see if I can pull a slide up, get back to pulling up a slide that shows, I'm gonna just share my screen. This is one of the slides, one of the sheets you had in your materials. But what you can see is that at the outset of the program, the transition of the program, we were at, I think it's about 17 or 18 participants in the program. That was what the average was looking like. The high was 21 participants prior to 2018. You can see that we spike all the way up to 59 as we are adding resources. I think that's maybe December 21, 59 participants. And that was a function of what was happening on the random audit correction process standardization. Answering some people who had been lingering and deciding you either go to grievance or you get satisfied. Those files working their way through the grievance process. And you see now in October 2023, we're somewhere around, I think it's 35 or 36 participants. I think we're getting to a level off point. So do I know the answer of how many? Not yet. My guess is that looking at what happens on the random audit, the number of audits that occur, the number of corrections required, and Jeff Lundgren and I are going to get to the process next of seeing what percentage of the corrections end up in grievance referrals. And once we start looking at that data, we should begin to be able to see what at least the trend of potential pipeline for the trust account compliance program participants are. And that would necessitate that there be no increase in the number of audits, because if you increase the number of audits, then you increase the potential corrections and the potential pipeline of people who end up referred to grievance.
Okay. Okay, our last bullet here was consideration of whether the program can or should be modified to make it available to more respondents. I think we've touched on that. Is there anything else, Leonore, you're designated to speak first on that? I think Alice has addressed that too. What are your thoughts there?
When Alice and I talked a little bit about modifying the program, Alice brought up the idea of a different category for folks sort of fitting in that broader deferral. And she asked me whether or not some of the folks who have been referred to trust account compliance program could just as easily participate in something that allowed for, let's say, complete a CLE and report back and be finished. And I think that determination, it's a hard question to answer. It's hard to know who would be right to go in that direction versus the trust account compliance program direction. Certainly everybody wouldn't be right to go in that direction. There are definitely a group of lawyers who are right where they belong in the trust account compliance program. But I think the right folks to make that decision would be the same people who make the decision about whether they think trust account compliance program is right. And that's the grievance committee.
So Alice, haven't, and Catherine, haven't we recently received some rule changes that allow us to put some conditions at the grievance committee level, put some conditions on discipline? Or have we
There's been-
asked for that? Remind me about that.
Well, there's been some discussion of it, but we haven't actually propounded any proposed rule amendments
Okay,
that will address it.
all right.
The way that, if they're in one of the deferrals that's already authorized by the administrative rules, then I think you can impose conditions. I mean, obviously, those programs exist,
Right.
but like, for example, I think there's been some discussion about tell a person, we're offering you the opportunity to go do this CLE, and if you complete it, then the grievance committee can, but is not required to dismiss the grievance. And if you don't go do this, we're going to give you a reprimand or something like that. There's not anything right now that would allow the grievance committee to do that. We could certainly fashion a proposed rule, and I don't have any sense of whether the Supreme Court would approve it or not. I mean, we had never talked with them about it, but we could certainly fashion it. And I think that is done in some other jurisdictions. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head which ones, but I've talked with lawyers from those offices of counsel in other jurisdictions that do have that kind of a program.
All right, other questions or comments? We're about to lose Alice. Alice, I appreciate you needing to head out.
Thank you, Walter.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
And we have met the hour mark, but I did want to touch quickly on this item 4 on the agenda, and whether this subcommittee thinks that it's worth pursuing further review and evaluation of our existing programs, thinking through whether there are efficiencies to recommend. We've got some great reports today, and whether we want to continue this study and looking into other areas in which we might want to consider deferral without committing to doing that, but just to study that and see if that is something that the state bar wants to move into. So
Walter, if I could, even though I need to leave, but
yeah.
speak to that. I think this subcommittee has done tremendous work, and you've met we met 3 times this quarter, which is tremendous. Usually subcommittees are meeting once a quarter. It's obvious that this is a big topic. It's got a lot of different moving parts to it. And I have in the background not encouraged that you rush to action, because I think this is something that's really important and we need to take time. So I would really encourage the subcommittee to ask that it be allowed to continue its work. The subcommittee may not be constituted exactly the same next year, given, the appointments and all of that. But I would hope that a good number of you would be able to continue on the subcommittee. It seems to me we've got on our plan for going forward, we wanted to talk to the folks at Lawyers Mutual about their vision in terms of law practice management and its importance, and how they might be helpful to a diversion program that included that. And I would like to also go back and tell you some more about the Iowa program, because I've had an opportunity to talk to their chief counsel about how that program works, and for us to really dig into the rules, the grievance committee rules, to see whether there's an appropriate way to change those that would allow for structuring some alternatives to discipline that wouldn't necessarily cost us tons and tons of money. So I really feel like this subcommittee has a lot more work to do, and it's really valuable work. And I would hope that you would want to continue this into next year, when I foresee that there could be some really strong recommendations to the well, up the chain to issues committee and then executive committee and then to the council. That could give the grievance committee some really good additional tools for trying to address conduct as opposed to just disciplining it. So I'm not supposed to have opinions, Walter, but there you go.
Appreciate that. I appreciate your deep interest in this whole topic too, Alice, driving this train from the beginning, and I appreciate it. I feel the same way. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of evaluation to do, and I'm not one who likes to fix the fence unless it's broke. And if we're going to make a change, to make sure we do it gradually and in a way that's not a shock to the system, and see what works, and if it doesn't work, change it, and if it still doesn't work, get rid of it. And so I think I feel like we're heading in that direction. I'd appreciate any other thoughts or ideas about this, and hope everybody on this committee now constituted would be interested in continuing over next year if Todd will be gracious enough to let us continue as a subcommittee. But other thoughts?
I was just going to say we definitely need to continue. I echo what Alice said. I think there's a lot more delving into some things that we can get into. If we could get a program that works, I know it's a small sample size, but what Kelly showed us about the no further discipline. I mean, that's ultimately the goal. If we could get to something like that, and I don't think it's something we can rush. So I echo that tremendously, and I would be glad to continue on this, or even help. Even if I don't get on this committee, I'll be glad to continue on with this subcommittee if approved.
Okay, well, I hope there's a consensus that we'd like to keep on working. Gordon, you look like you're ready to say something.
Our work here is not finished.
Got the thumbs up from Kevin.
Yeah.
And
I'm
Fred,
adopting the Catherine Jean approach. Few words.
As Kevin, I completely agree.
Okay. Well, great guys. This has been a very interesting project so far, and I hope we can move forward. And I can tell you from the PMBR cybersecurity experience, if you're going to implement new programs, it takes a lot of time and a lot of thought to do it, because you don't want to do it and make a mess of it, because it's better not to do it. That one's coming along. It's going to be interesting to see how that shapes up. And thank you all. It's past the hour time. Just remind you, we're going to try to set up a meeting in November of this committee and get a report on some offerings that Lawyers Mutual can make, and the Bar Association to help us with considering a deferral program for law office management training. Look forward to seeing you guys next week. And unless there's anything further, I'll say that we're adjourned. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.